What is up guys, I'm Spear and today we're looking at some Reason sound design. We're going to build a massive sidechained dubstep chord patch, which sounds quite nice when it's layered with some other stuff. But I'm going to show you an example now anyway, so listen here. It's quite a big sound to build, so let's get right into it so this tutorial doesn't take too long. First up, let's build our sidechain setup. But before that, I'm just going to quickly show you what this file looks like. It's basically the example that you just heard, minus the big chords. So we still get some arpeggios right here, some vocal cuts and some piano notes, just to accompany the big sound and make the drop more interesting and intricate to listen to. And of course we got the percussion and all that. But now let's get into the sound. As I said, we're going to build our sidechain setup first, and we're going to use the ghost kick method. So I'm just going to hold down shift and chuck in a red drum. Then I'm going to pull it over in the third rag lane. And I'm going to show you later why this is very useful. Then we're going to chuck in a kick sample, and you can use any kick sample here, into the first slot on the red drum, and then I'm going to chuck in some audio mergers and splitters just beneath the red drum. I'm just duplicating them here. Then I'm going to hook up the red drum to the first splitter and then take one of the outs into the next splitter and so on until we have a bunch of outputs at our disposal. Great, now that this is set up, we can bring down the length to about 42 on our kick, so it isn't that long, and we can then use the release on a compressor to further shape the side chaining. And we're going to get into the sequencer, pull up our lane right here, and we're going to copy over some of the kick notes into our ghost kick lane, and we're going to have them play at a simple 4 on the floor beat that is of course double the time of our usual dubstep beat, which makes for a cool dynamic sound when we then sidechain our big chord to it. So now that our sidechain setup is complete, we can get into creating the actual sound. Now with a big sound like that, you'll want to think of it as a couple of little sounds layered together. This is a principle that you can apply to pretty much every sound in sound design. When it's a bit more complicated, think of it as little sounds combined, and you're going to have a much easier time building a sound. And for this big pad, we're going to build the bass first, because the bass is actually our basis. It supplies a lot of the raw energy, and it adds a very nice tone to the whole sound. Because later when we're going to build the big chords, we're just using saw waves for that. But on the bass you can play around with different patches and distortions and make it sound very interesting and unique. So the bass is actually the most important part of this big chord. I'm going to use a Maelstrom here because it's my favorite synth for all things bass. And we're going to use the Juno wavetable, which is absolutely amazing. When you pull down the motion all the way, set it to octave 2, and bring up the shift to about 12. Next, we're going to route it into the shaper. We're going to deactivate filter A, and we're going to activate the shaper on clip mode, and we'll bring up the amount all the way to get a nice distorted sound. Perfect. Then we're going to turn on oscillator B, set it at a sawtooth times 16, bring down the octave to octave 3, bring down the motion a bit to about minus 36, and we'll bring down the shift a bit to about minus 12. This is just to make the sound a bit fuller. Perfect. Then we're going to route it through an equalizer, and we're going to take out some frequencies at about 334 Hertz. You can hear that there's a bit of a ringer right there, and taking this ringer out just makes the whole sound a lot cleaner. We're also going to take out some of the highs, because later on we're going to layer a bunch of stuff there, and we don't want the highs to be too dominant in this bass patch. So we're just going to use the high shelf right here to reduce the highs a bit. And we'll also take out the lows, because with a distorted bass patch like that, you'll want to replace the lows with a sub bass patch. So using the low shelf and the parameter at frequency 39 Hz, we can reduce the lows quite a bit. Perfect. Now let's route this through a compressor, and we're going to use this compressor, of course, as our sidechain compressor. So now when we flip around the rack, we can see our sidechain ins on the compressor. And the cool thing about having the whole sidechain set up in the third rack lane is that now when you right click on these outs, on these jacks, you have the spider outs right here at the end of your list. And that will always be the case as long as you don't put anything under the red drum in the third rack lane. So I'm just going to go into the Spider 1 audio right here and select the first split output for our sidechain in on this compressor. We'll bring up the ratio all the way, we'll reduce the threshold all the way to have the maximum compression going, we'll bring down the attack all the way, and we can even bring up the release quite a bit, not quite a bit, but a bit, to about 360 milliseconds. Because we want pretty massive sidechaining that you can really hear, you really want to hear the signal being ducked with this kind of patch. And then, last but not least, we're going to use an RV700 on the room algorithm, just to make this bass a little bit bigger and a little bit more stereo and not quite as boring. We also bring up the output gain on the compressor a bit, because this patch on itself is pretty low on volume. Great. So now that this is all set up and we have a nice and dirty bass to build with, we're just going to record a couple of notes right here into the sequencer. Alright, so as you can see, I've just recorded some single notes on octave 2 in here, and I'm just gonna quickly check that I hit all the right notes and my timing is correct, but it looks to be alright. Something I forgot is you want to bring down the polyphony to 1, because you don't want two bass notes playing at the same time. But this clip looks alright to me. Of course, it didn't really sound like anything yet, because this is just the bass, and the bass even without the lows. So we're going to go right ahead and build our sub bass to change that. We're going to chuck in a Thor on a sine wave on the analog oscillator, bring down the octave to octave 2. We can deactivate the filter and bring up the sustain on the amp envelope all the way, which is very important. Right, this is it for the Thor of the sub bass patch. We are going to chuck in a compressor just beneath that, and once again hook up the sidechain in to one of the Spider audios. There we go. Bring up the ratio all the way, reduce the threshold all the way, bring down the attack all the way, and again we'll give it some release so the sidechain is very audible. There's our sub bass. We can now just copy over the notes that we played for our bass, and now we've got some nice lows, which are very important as well, of course. I think this is the channel. Yep. Alright. Humble beginnings, but we're getting there. Next up is the first actual chord patch, because we have just been building a monophonic synth right here with the bass and the sub bass. Now we're going to change things up and get into the polyphony by creating a Thor for our first chord patch. We're going to have two different chord patches all together, and for our first patch we're looking for a kind of analog sound with a bit of warmth to it, but also quite the energy. We're not looking at highs that much yet, because we're going to build a fourth synth patch that really focuses on the highs. So for this one, we're going to activate all 3 oscillators and chuck in 3 analog oscillators, all on sawtooth. And we're going to detune the first oscillator to 7, and we're going to detune the second to -7. And we're going to leave the third one dead center. Then we'll bring up the frequency on the low pass filter all the way, reduce the envelope and velocity amount all the way, and bring up the resonance a bit, so we have some emphasis on the highs. Next up, we'll turn on the shaper, switch it to sine mode, and bring down the drive all the way to 0. What this does, it changes the sound just a bit to make it sound a bit more metallic and have it have a bit more energy. Of course, you want to bring up the sustain on the amp envelope all the way. The shaper on sine mode just suppresses the signal a bit and gives it a nice kind of tone that I like, but you can play around with these settings, of course. Next up, once again, we have our equalizer to shape the spectrum further, and we're going to use it here to take out some frequencies at about 6 kHz. What this does is it reduces the harshness of a sound. We don't want to go too crazy with our settings though, so we'll have our gain at about -7.5 dB. Next up, we're going to use the high shelf because we do want the overall highs to be pretty dominant in this sound, so we're gonna bring up the frequency a bit and the gain as well. So we have a quite high dominant sound. Which already supplies a lot of energy, which is cool. Next up, we are going to use a reverb on the film score algorithm, which if you watched my videos a bit, you know is my favorite reverb algorithm. It's just a very nice sounding hall. Yeah. Something I forgot, by the way, is we also want to take out the lows on this patch. It's not as important as with the distorted bass, but when you're sound designing, you want to make it a habit to bring down the lows of every sound that is not really there just for the lows, like a sub bass or a bass. Bass that is not distorted, I should say. So making sure you have no lows where there should be no lows is very important, so that your mix in the end doesn't sound too muddy. Perfect though. Next up, we're going to chuck in our compressor, of course, because we want this sound to be sidechained as well. And we're going to use the last two outs on our first spider. Bring up the ratio, bring down the threshold, bring down the attack, and bring up the release a bit. So, now that this is set up, we can record a couple of chords into the sequencer. So let me just give that a try. Okay, as you've heard, the levels are much too low, so I'm going to bring up the output gain on this chord a bit, so we can actually hear it over all the other craziness. Right, perfect. The notes in this clip aren't all so tidy, but I'm just gonna skip the tidying up right here, because the tutorial is already taking much too long. Something I forgot though, which is quite important right here in the rack, is that you want to apply a Scream 4 distortion unit to this chain to have this sound be really warm and a bit analog sounding, but also to have it be very upfront and quite energetic. So I'm going to switch up the distortion algorithm to tape, bring up the P1 all the way and leave the P2 as it is. And I'm going to reduce the damage to about 38 and bring up the master a bit. Or reduce the master a bit, sorry, because I already brought up the output gain. Yeah, you don't need to push it too high. You can hear this just makes the sound much more upfront, and we can now hear it a lot better in our fully sequenced out track. Alright, perfect. Next up, we're going to create our last synth in this patch, in this sound, and it's going to be a maelstrom, and this one will really focus on the highs and on the stereo width of this sound. So we're going to use a sawtooth times 16 for our wavetable and bring up the octave 1, so bring it up to 5. And then we'll route it through an equalizer as usual to shape the spectrum a bit. We're going to take out the lows using the low shelf and one parameter. And we're going to use the high shelf and another parameter to bring up the highs just really by a lot. And normally you really wouldn't want such harsh equalizer settings, but in this scenario where we are just using this patch as one layer to a bigger sound, we can use more extreme settings. Great. Next up, we are going to route this whole thing through a unison, and we're going to leave the dry wet all the way up, so it's really stereo. It has a huge stereo width and has this great unison sound to it. Then we're going to use our compressor to apply the side chaining, and at this point, if you've wondered why I'm not just routing everything to one bus and just sidechaining it in one bus altogether, so I don't have to use all these different compressors, here I actually want the compressor to go before the reverb, so that the reverb actually bleeds over into the compressed parts, and we have a bigger sound and a much more like heavenly atmosphere with this patch. So this is why I'm applying the compression to every patch individually, so I can decide whether or not I want the reverb to be compressed as well. But there are other solutions with send effects and such, which might be easier, but this is just the way I like to do it. So let's just quickly set up our sidechain compression and add the reverb to this chain. And you guessed it, we're going to chuck in a film score preset, bring down the dry wet a bit, and bring down the decay a bit, but we want a lot of reverb, so we'll set the dry wet to about 50 and the decay to about 80. And we can also reduce the damp because we want the reverb to be also pretty hard on the highs. Last but not least, we're going to over-exaggerate the stereo width completely using the stereo imager, bringing up the X over frequency just a bit to about 1.6 kilohertz, and then just bringing up the width of the high band all the way. So again, we have extremely harsh settings on this patch, which you wouldn't want if you were just using this patch on its own. But as a layer to a bigger patch, these settings are, well, pretty normal. Yeah, sounds a bit weird, but when I take the chords of our first chord patch and I copy them over and bring up the level a bit or bring it down, we'll see then this should sound a lot better. Alright, cool. Now, as you've heard, you should really tidy up the note clip because you can really hear how I struggle to keep up the timing when I play the keys, and you can hear that in the clip, and you don't want that in your finished song. So you should just quantize the notes and then adjust the lengths so they are really on spot and you don't miss on any transitions. So I think I'm just gonna tidy this up real quick so you can see what I'm talking about. I think that's good enough. That's gotta be good enough. So let's copy this down here, and I'm also going to bring down this note to a C, I think, because this was a little bit too high, and when I bring one of the chord patches down a bit, it's not that high anymore and it doesn't hurt in the ears. Alright, a quick word about the chords that I used. I usually write all my music in A minor, as you can see, and some of the transitions are really cool when you go from A using the 5th, so E, and up top I'm using the C. So like when you play the chord normally, I take the note that's in between the A and the E, which is the C in this case, and I transpose it up 1 octave. That usually sounds pretty cool. And when you then transition down to an F major chord, I think it is. I'm really bad at music theory, but you can see the notes here. It's F, C, and on top, again, using the same scheme as here, would be an A, but I'm bringing it down to a G, which makes it a bit uneven, but it sounds pretty cool, I think. It's this chord. Let's use this patch. I really like this chord, especially when you come down from an A minor chord. And then I just go up to G again. Well, not again, but I go up to G. And again, using the same method, bringing up the B 1 octave. And at the end, again, making it a bit uneven by bringing up the B to a C. And in the second run, I'm going from A minor to C major chord. I don't really know. It's C, G, and an E. And then again, I go to a B, and I just have the notes on the top harmony decline in pitch, which gives this nice kind of well, feeling of coming home and ending the loop. Alright, thank you for listening and staying with me. If you did stay with me all these 20 minutes, you deserve a cookie, and you can claim it in the comments below. I'll see you next time. Have a good one of whatever you're having, and